Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Tea Tuesday. I'd like to thank Life with Patti and Kathy's Favorite Things for hosting this open collab. This is tea, and you can have informal tea, you can have formal tea, you can have cold tea, you can have hot tea, or you can have a beverage of your choice. So today I'm drinking peach mango out of a well-used glass mug, whatever you want to call it, and it sure does taste good. So what we're going to read today is Mr. Twiddle. I wonder how much trouble Mr. Twiddle's going to get into this week. Oh, do we need a little bit more light? Yeah, maybe we do. So let's get started. Let's see, do I have any other news I want to address? No, I guess not. Not at this time. I thought I did. Okay, Mr. Twiddle tries to help. Once Mrs. Twiddle twisted her ankle and couldn't get about as usual to do her work. Mr. Twiddle was very sorry for her. Now, my dear, just sit down and let me run about for you, he said. I've got a pair of legs, haven't I? Well, I can do everything just as well as you. You want brains as well as legs, dear Mrs. Twiddle, said Mrs. Twiddle, sitting down with a sigh. Oh, poor ankle. Well, well, you must do a little to help me. Twiddle, that's quite certain. Twiddle worked quite well for a while. He wrote out the list for the washing. Nothing to wash in, is there? He dusted the drawers, the drawing room. He fed the cat. Then he felt really tired and sat down for a rest, probably with his newspaper and pipe, and fell asleep. How many think that's what happened? Mrs. Twiddle called him, Twiddle, Twiddle, where have you got to? There's somebody at the back door, and did you put the pudding in the oven as I told you to? Twiddle was half asleep. He got up at once, rubbing his eyes. He went to the back door. A boy was there with a clock. Your clock mended, sir, said the boy, and gave Mr. Twiddle his lovely drawing room clock. Mr. Twiddle was pleased. He had missed the clock because it struck the half hour and chimed the hours. It was a nice clock. It's the clock. It's the clock. Come back, he said to Mrs. Twiddle. I must just put it on the drawing room mantelpiece. Oh, Twiddle, I do wish you'd put the rice pudding in the oven first, said Mrs. Twiddle. I keep asking you to. It won't be ready for dinner time if you don't. Do as you're told. If you really want to help me. All right, my dear, said Twiddle, still half asleep. And whatever do you think he did? Why, he put the drawing room clock into the oven, then he picked up the rice pudding in the enamel dish and put it carefully in the drawing room mantelpiece. He wasn't thinking what he was doing, of course. He shut the oven door on the clock, and then he went to see what else he could do. Mrs. Twiddle hadn't noticed anything. She was knitting hard. The cat gave a meow when it saw the pudding in the oven. Uh-oh. What's going to happen? I lost my place. Just a moment. But nobody took any notice of the meow. So the cat settled down and went to sleep. After a bit, the clock in the oven struck the half hour. Mrs. Twiddle looked up. Why, Twiddle, she said, that clock is somewhere in the kitchen. I distinctly heard it strike. How it can strike in the kitchen when I put it in the drawing room? Asked Twiddle, feeling crossed. Oh, no. You do say surprisingly things, wife. Well, I suppose I was mistaken, said Mrs. Twiddle, knitting again. Now at 12 o'clock, the clock not only struck 12 times, chimed 2. Ding dong, it went. Ding dong, Twiddle, the clock is certainly in the kitchen, said Mrs. Twiddle. Well, Twiddle heard it strike and chime as well, and he too felt sure it was in the kitchen. So he went, looked around, but couldn't see it anywhere, of course. This wasn't surprising, as it was still in the oven. Oh, Mr. Twiddle. I can't understand it, wife, said Twiddle, scratching his head. I distinctly remember taking it into the drawing room. Twiddle just looked to see if the milk pudding is getting on all right, said Mrs. Twiddle. It should be doing nicely now. And here's a picture. Oh, yeah. Twiddle opened the oven door, and inside the drawing room clock, looking out at him, very surprised face, because it was slowly cooking and didn't like it at all. Twiddle, you surely didn't put the clock in to cook in the oven, cried Mrs. Twiddle. Oh, Twiddle, and we just had it mended. Oh, I'm sure it will have done it no good to cook like that, you foolish man. Take it out at once. So Twiddle, looking so foolishly, took it out and sat it on the shelf to cool. It made a very particular noise and then stopped ticking. It stopped, said Mrs. Twiddle. Now it will have to go and be mended again, and it's only just come back. Really, Twiddle? And what about the pudding? Did you look in the oven and see how that is doing? Twiddle looked, but of course the pudding wasn't there. It was most extraordinary. I know I put it in there, said Twiddle. I feel sure I did, but it's vanished. Just then there came a knock at the front door. There's Mrs. Harris and Mrs. Twiddle. Show her into the drawing room, please, Twiddle, and say I will come in half a minute. I must just put my shoe on. Twiddle went to the front door and showed Mrs. Harris into the drawing room. He said that Mrs. Twiddle would only be a minute, and it wasn't long before his wife was hobbling into the drawing room with a stick. Good morning, Mrs. Twiddle, said Mrs. Harris. Did you know that your cat was eating an uncooked rice pudding in the middle of the mantelpiece? I just wondered if that was the usual place to give her her dinner. Mrs. Twiddle looked at the mantelpiece in horror, and sure enough, there was Puss lapping up the milk and the rice for all it was worth, enjoying such an unusual treat. Shoo, Puss, shoo, cried Mrs. Twiddle, clapping her hands at once. The cat leaped off and upset the dish. The milk dripped into the fender. I have to take a drink. And the dish fell with a clatter. Twiddle, Twiddle, you must put the pudding on the mantelpiece instead of the clock, and you put the clock in the oven instead of the pudding, cried Mrs. Twiddle. Oh, it's much quicker to do things myself. What a stupid, foolish man you are, to be sure. And poor Twiddle thought the same as he fetched a cloth to mop up the milky mess. I've got to pay to mend the clock again, he thought sadly, and I've spoilt the pudding, but never mind about that. I never did like rice pudding. Whatever will he do next? I really can't think. And that's the end of that chapter. Next week, oh my, it's the end of the book. It's the end. I have one more book to go, though, and then I'll have to see if I can order some more. I'd like to thank you for coming to Tea Tuesday. And a little bit update on me. My ribs are starting to feel better. Praise God for that. Thank you for all the prayers, and thank you for the wonderful get well cards that I have received in the mail. Talking about that, yes, we did. Also, this is an open collaboration. It's called Tea Tuesday with a hashtag. I'll put the hashtag down below in the description, and I will have Kathy's Favorite Things with a link and Patty's Life with Patti. They are the ones that started this open collab on Tea Tuesday, and hope to see you there next week. Come along, enjoy the women and gents. You never know what they're going to be doing for their Tea Tuesday. Do whatever you want, craft, talk, color, whatever. Have a great day. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye now.